that took a lot longer for the first vid than I expected to be, just to talk about I feel like I fall under verbal shutdowns or struggle with this a lot. But I wanted to just elaborate a little bit more. I definitely continue to have issues with verbal shutdowns as an adult, and it has been one of the bigger struggles that I've had as far as communication, and is definitely an area when I was getting assessed that I have a deficit in for my autism, and communication and social communication especially. And that's where, for me, on my spectrum, that I really fall into having deficits. So that really helps explain, for this aspect at least, how I fall under this. But I'm going to go into explaining some other areas. So the next one that is very tangible to me is also very limited social life. So this was, again, one of the biggest deficits I had from my autism assessment, and how I basically, even with when my husband filled out the assessment form on his part, and then my father even though he was kind of playing down the severity of my issues, question when it came to, do you have any friends, or are you a social person, was very much me being, no, I really don't have any friends, and I haven't had a lot of friends in a really long time. So I have never been a person who wants a huge group of friends, and knowing who I am and like how I have this community now that I'm involved with, and a lot of people that I've grown to love and care and I would consider as friends, it may look like I have a lot of friends, but I honestly don't, as far as my own definition of friendship. But as far as this limited social life, like, a lot of my socialization is through interactions online and my friends that I have online, and that I've been grateful to find through TikTok and through being a part of the autism community. But in real life, or in just life in general, I rarely ever see people ever. And it has been, like, before my autism assessment and before I was diagnosed, I just considered myself as an introvert, because that's very true. I am an introverted person, but I rarely had any desire to go out and do social things. If I were to do social things, it had to be with people that I was extremely familiar with, and the plans, of course, and my rigidity in plans and routines had to be very structured and clear. If you invited somebody that I wasn't planning to hang out with, it completely completely throws me off. And this happens a lot with certain people. And also canceling plans last minute, things like that always come up because of people being people. What are the reasons why I also have a very limited social life? I have a very limited social life because, again, even though I've had like groups of friends in my life, it's been extremely hard for me since I'm an adult to be able to maintain any kind of friendship that has a high expectation of me being consistently in check with them. I can't do that. And luckily, the majority of my friends who I'm very close to now, I'm close to, and we continue to be friends because they're all autistic or they're neurodivergent, and they understand and have the expectation of not having expectations for each other, and that has been extremely helpful. But having a very limited social life, at least for me, I know is contributed to me being autistic, and because of my really a clear deficit for me for social understanding and communication. And the reason I know I have this deficit as well as been observed is the many examples and instances in my life where I could never pick up on the social cue of the small things of like saying hello, knowing how to leave a conversation when a conversation's ended, how to do small talk. It's a lot of things that, I know many autistic people can experience when it comes to social communication. This for me and my social deficit with social communication is that I because of also with the speaking aspect of being and having issues with selective mutism as a kid, I was never able to really socialize or have friends that I didn't grow up with. If you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I've mentioned many times that I grew up in a kind of unique situation when it came to school. And I was literally with the same exact people from kindergarten up until 8th grade for the US system of education for that long. So I literally didn't need to make friends. It was so very like autistic friendly environment because I didn't have to go into this normal situation for me as an autistic person to be like, who are you? I'm this person. What do you do? Blah, blah, blah. What do you like? Because I grew up with the same people for years and I never had to practice that socialization. And even though we had so many different kids coming in and out of this school, I consistently knew and stayed with the friends and people I grew up since I was like 3. But I noticed a huge deficit when I was outside of those environments. So as a kid, outside of the realms of that school that I grew up with, I literally had the biggest issues talking to any person who was basically a stranger. I have made this example before in one of my videos about when I was figure skating or ice skating and I had these group of friends. I really was just quiet the majority of the times, but they were just very nice to me. There were a couple times when one girl specifically, and she was nice. It's not like I didn't want to hang out with her, but it was just us, like a one-on-one thing. And that's where I really struggle, is because if I don't know you and I don't know you well and we don't click, it's going to be very hard for me to even try to interact with you. And now as an adult, I don't even try. But as a kid, it was the most excruciating thing, like just thinking about it, because it was just so silent and so awkward because I didn't know what to say. Literally, I had no idea how to interact. And then the other times that she was there by herself and I was also there, I hid in like back rooms so that I didn't have to try to interact with her. And even as an adult, I avoid social outings for a lot of reasons, because of not knowing what's going to happen, or knowing that I will be overstimulated by the environment or by the people, or I avoid a lot of social stuff because of my preferences, the sensory issues. There's so many things attributed to my autism that make me have a very, very limited social life. Oh my gosh, these series are going to be so long. I am so sorry. I have so much to say. I kind of actually want to continue talking about how I have a very limited social life and why that falls within my support needs to potentially be medium or moderate support needs because of my very big social communication and social interaction deficit. It's very clear to me, and this is like, again, why it's a struggle for me to have any friends who are not autistic or at least somewhat neurodivergent, because in pretty much all social situations, I have been thought to be a certain type of person that I'm definitely not, where a lot of people have considered me to be like a mean person, or they've considered me to be like standoffish, or that I'm rude. Misinterpretations about me because I'm missing a lot of social cues, or I'm somewhat like not understanding the implications of things I'm saying, even though I'm just being very clear, direct, or just even that being very clear or direct in what I'm saying, because it's usually a unacceptable thing to do in social scenarios and situations. I get misinterpreted and I get imposed to be somebody that's really not who I am. And so in order to avoid these misrepresentations of myself, I just avoid people in general. And I avoid having like any real kind of social life. But that's, for me, I'm okay with that. I've always enjoyed just being by myself. But it's also the reason why I need a lot of support in this area, as far as like the type of accommodations and support I need from friends and family to be understanding of my autism and how I have such a huge deficit in my social communication and my communication in general. And now as an adult, that is somewhat of my way of accommodating myself, is to hold space and not to waste any of my energy, my ability to speak to others who are not going to be compassionate or give me grace in the way that I need from being an autistic person. There are many instances of my life where I just do not care anymore. Like I have really unmasked, and that's definitely given me some skill regression in like being able to mask in situations where I have to, like being around my in-laws or being around certain friends that have continuously been mean to me or, you know, but in some way still care about them. There's so many complex relationships that I have right now where masking is a necessity in order for me to, in a sense, survive or get by. But because of my unmasking, that has created a huge skill regression for me, but also in the way that I've learned to accommodate myself because of this skill regression in not being able to mask as well when I feel uncomfortable, when I am not speaking in social situations, is to not feel ashamed, because now I know why I'm like that. And it's because of my autism. Whereas before I felt very shameful and I feel a lot of guilt. I would go into this very ruminating spiral of how maybe I am this terrible person. Why can't I talk? Why is it so hard for me to socialize? These people aren't being mean intentionally. Maybe I am just truly a bitch, when that is not the case at all. Now that I've become more aware of these social dynamics and these rules that I again, because I just don't agree with them because of my autism, as well as not understanding, you know, certain times when I'm supposed to be saying things, and that will always be a struggle for me. I don't want to waste my own personal energy anymore caring about other people and their feelings when they don't make any effort to care about mine. And instead of like coming from a place of curiosity and being like, hey, you know, I could see something's going on and I'm sorry about that. You know, what can I do to help you? And kind of helping to accommodate me. People will label based off what they see. And I hate that. I don't want to be around people who immediately have that type of mindset. So that for me is how I'm accommodating myself in that very big deficit of mine. The area that I want to talk about for myself is having sensory issues that are hard to suppress and cause meltdowns. And basically that's again something, oh my gosh, it all really comes full circle where my issues with communication contribute to my very limited social life, but also my very limited social life is in tangent to my very big issues with sensory stuff and having meltdowns. So for me, I've always struggled with very specific sensory issues, and especially loud environments, being overstimulated by those environments, and then also with the high masking that I used to do. And even now when I am masked, it's still very draining for me. And when you have to be very social or just social in general, there are so many things that I get from input or sensory input in general when it comes to lighting, sound, smell, and everything, right? So when you go into having social life in general, or you have to go to these locations, which are usually like restaurants, which are so overstimulating, or these group type of activities, I've always struggled with this since I was a kid. I've never liked going to gatherings as a child because they were too overstimulating for me, because I didn't talk to anybody and I couldn't communicate to anybody, even if they were like family events, like weddings or parties. I wouldn't talk to anybody. I wouldn't. It was extremely hard for me, and I didn't want to socialize at all. And so I would hide. And I would try to be by myself in some other location, but it was also just so overwhelming for me because there were so many sensory things that were happening with people and kids around me screaming and having those issues with that with like way too much overstimulation. And being from a family who's like, especially my Filipino side, I love them. That side of the family in those parties are very loud and overstimulating. And for some, that can be really fun. But for me, I hate that stuff. I was thought to be from my parents like a very rude or giving attitude, because every time I went to these types of social outings, I had no way of understanding that I was being overstimulated by so much sensory input. I would have these verbal shutdowns, or I would internalize these issues, and because I'm not good at masking at all, it would look like I was just mean or that I hated life. And everybody always would point out, like, to me, like, especially because I was a girl, like, oh, you need to smile more, Janella, or why do you look like you're not having a good time? Because I wasn't having a good time. And oh my gosh, when it comes to food and sensory issues, like, I was extremely picky as a child, where the only things that I would eat for the longest time was just like chicken, ketchup, and bread. And those three together sometimes too. And I was very much thought to be a crybaby when I was a child. But in all the issues where I'm having like sensory overload, or I'm having an overload from the situation of being like pressured in social life, I would have verbal shutdowns. And those verbal shutdowns would usually result in me having a meltdown, because people would keep pushing me to speak. People would keep pushing me or saying things about me that I ultimately had to suppress those sensory issues so that I would avoid having meltdowns. The description for at least sensory issues, and I don't personally have as much meltdowns now, but it's because I'm very aware now as an adult what my high sensory issues are. And now I've learned to accommodate myself whenever I'm in any kind of social situation where I know I will potentially have a sensory overload and may cause some kind of verbal shutdown or meltdown. I make sure to bring all the accommodations I know will help me to avoid or at least prevent a meltdown until I feel like I'm in a safer situation to release that tension. But just another example, and this is somewhat recent, this happened last year, and also a cause of one of my very big fights with one of a close friends that I had for a long time, is that I was very anxious about a social outing, and that outing was in a location that I wasn't familiar with, that I wanted to make sure I understood like what I was going to eat, and I had a plan ahead. Once I got there on the day of, and the buildup of that anxiety for this social outing with these people, I was already overstimulated by a lot of things that happened during that week, as well as anxious about the meetup. And once I was there, and I know now that when I'm in those states where I'm already at a high state of anxiety and a high state of like overwhelm, or my level of sensory input is increased, I'm even more sensitive to sensory input and issues in outings or situations that are already overstimulate me. So during this outing, I was very aware of how much I was struggling in the social aspect of things, and that became something I was aware of, and I kept like thinking of how different I was in the social communication with this group of people, that even though I knew I was very much struggling and I was having sensory issues because of what I was wearing and how uncomfortable or like how I felt with my hair, and I started noticing those things a lot more. And then the environment, even though the lighting was at least nice, it was still pretty loud with like people going in and out, and I was very aware of that. And basically by the end of this outing, I just wanted to leave. Like I needed to go. And on the outside, to those people or to those friends, they thought I was having a problem with them and took it very personally, especially one person in particular. And I could see that, you know, I'm very sensitive to people's reactions and emotions to me now as an adult, because I've been so observant from years that I could read people very well. And even though I could read people very well, it's still a struggle for me to know how to properly respond. And so I needed to leave in that situation. I needed to jet because I knew I was going to have a meltdown. And as soon as I left and I got in my car, I had a meltdown. Like, what was the biggest thing for my meltdowns is I have a lot of crying, and I have a lot of like aggressive or anger meltdowns, and I need to hit things. And one of the biggest things that are experiences that really made me aware of like something is off, and that made me, before I was diagnosed, go into really researching and assessing myself for autism, was picking up my family or my parents at the LAX airport, which is a terrible experience, and I've talked about this in a different video. But I remember that day because it was the 4th of July weekend. And so, of course, people were coming in and out from seeing their families. And already, like, my parents said, we are going to be here at this specific time. Come pick us up. And I was like, cool, I'm going to be there. And if you are aware of LA traffic and how it is here for LAX, it is terrible. So of course I had to leave at like 2 hours or so ahead to even get there on time, to the time that they said they would be able to be picked up. And on the way there, they texted me and saying that their flight is delayed. And so that already just jolted my head that, okay, this is a change that I was not expecting. And I was already triggered from that issue. And then once I got to that area for LAX, there many like construction things going on. I didn't even know where to like pick up my parents, even though they told me to. And the fact that they kept getting delayed and saying that they wouldn't be picked up at the time just kept increasing my anxiety, my sensory issues. And I was also very aware, like, I had to use the restroom, and that is like the worst sensory issue for me, is trying to suppress that I have to go to the bathroom and I have to hold it, and the feeling of holding it in my body is so overwhelming. And it was one of the days where I was very aware that something in a sense was wrong with me, because I was going around on that LAX while everybody else, you could see they're frustrated and annoyed with the traffic and stuff like that. But I was the only one screaming in my car, banging on my steering wheel, having a literal aggressive meltdown, versus everybody else just having more internalized frustration. And also when I finally was able to pick up my parents, I immediately just outlashed on them and was like, why didn't you know, you said you were going to be this time, yada, yada, and I need to go to the bathroom. And I was just, just letting them have it, even though that's not what I intend to do. But that's what happens a lot when I am in a meltdown state, in a very high state for me, in those aggressive meltdowns. And that has always been an issue for me ever since I was a kid, and even now as an adult. And it has been one of my areas that I have struggled with the most, is my aggressive meltdowns and being able to suppress as well as control myself so that I don't continue to progress in a red state for myself. Therapy has been really helpful. Learning how to accommodate myself when I'm in an aggressive state and letting it out in a healthy way has been helpful. But before that, before my diagnosis, before finding these options that made it easier for me to come down from those states of overload and meltdowns, I didn't have anything to help me. I still struggle with this, and this is something that I know I will always struggle with if I don't have the right accommodations. Now on to developmental delays or regression. So I've already kind of talked about my skill regression when it comes to my adult experience. And as a child, I think for the most part, I did have some developmental delays in language processing, understanding like how to pronounce things, words, but I don't know, because of my background, that I come from an immigrant family, whether that is attributed to my autism or the fact that my parents their first language isn't English. So it's like hard for me, and this is where my intersectionality, when it comes to the last few areas of being medium support needs or moderate support needs, I have always had to try to like really dissect, because when it comes to developmental delays, being able to live alone, needing a caregiver, or needing like handover prompt stuff, I can see where I have issues in all those areas, but at the same time, I've developed some sense of independency or haven't met some kind of developmental delay because of how I was brought up as a child or because of my unique background. For developmental delays and regression, it's hard for me to scale that I was in a sense behind because I grew up in a private Christian school, and honestly the education really wasn't great. Like it was definitely like the teachers there really did teach well, and it was all like memorization based education. And so I didn't really learn anything, honestly, because when I went to public school in high school, I did see that I was behind, and I was like, I didn't learn this. And it was more of a factor that I didn't learn it because the school I was brought up in didn't present that option. When I was in my private school, if you compared me to my peers, I was technically more like progressive, or I did really well because coming from an Asian background and A equals Asian kind of thing, like where education is such a big deal, I always made sure to get straight A's. And that for me was easy because of the memorization. And I have extremely good memorization where I also just use that type of understanding in my ability in schools and academia, since a lot of academia for the most part, when you don't have to critically think, is just memorization. So I can't really say whether I have developmental delays as a child. I maybe did, and it just was kind of swept under the rug because of the upbringing that I had. And I really wonder whether I would have had developmental delays if I was in a public school and I was kind of, met with the same criteria that everybody else had to meet and have this kind of unique background or experience in education. But I've already mentioned in the previous part of my series that I am experiencing a lot of skill regression because I had to learn and practice to be able to verbalize and to be able to speak. And as an adult, I could see my ability to speak well as in general, my ability to make very coherent sentences. I still struggle with that. Like a lot of the stuff that you see as far as how I speak well is because of editing, or my ability to public speak was because I memorized and had mimicked and had practiced how I needed to present those words in front of an audience. But if you give me any kind of area of speaking where I have to be on the spot and think and and I don't have anything prepared, I have this issue where it's really hard for me to naturally verbalize what I'm trying to say without having some kind of preparation in advance. For being able to live with support or residential care, unable to live alone, need a caregiver, and need handover prompting with basic tasks. This is where I feel like maybe I meet kind of more low support needs areas. But I feel like it's mostly exclusive to my experience, again, with my upbringing, where because my parents did as much as they could, but being that they were immigrant parents and they had to work so much, and I have 2 older brothers, and so handling children and 3 children, and also going to a private school, which was expensive, and then also trying to have a mortgage, all these things that were factored into our household. I grew up in a very kind of like low income household, and so my ability to somewhat take care of myself was already started at a very young age. I had to like learn how to create responsibilities and to enact and to take care of my own chores and responsibilities, because it was something that was already kind of ingrained in my upbringing, where when it came to chores, it became a system of me practicing a give and take thing, where I would get something only like an allowance or certain thing that I've been wanting only if I did that chore, or if I had some way of taking care of myself and my family in order to get, in a sense, what I wanted. So as an individual now, as an adult, I'm very thankful I have that, and I have that ability to that sense of independency, because now I know how to take care of myself. However, I would love, and I honestly, when I hear my friends talk about their occupational therapists or their OTs, it sounds amazing to me to have an extra hand of support somebody who can be there to kind of hold you accountable, but also give you a sense of your agency and support when you need it when it comes to daily tasks like cooking, cleaning, getting groceries, and making certain decisions. Like having that stuff, if I had somebody who could take that sense of the load off of me, I would really benefit from. And I think that could help me in limiting the amount of burnout I have from week to week and throughout the year. I know I've personally reduced my burnout and how I struggle with burnout a lot more because, again, I've kind of developed a lot of these accommodations for myself in order to meet the responsibilities that I have as a full-time worker, having to live independently apart from just living with my husband, but having to take care of like my own pets. I have to take care of myself. I have to pay rent. I have to do all these things because I also live in a country that is prideful of individualism. I've had to make myself be able to live on my own or be able to handle tasks without anybody needing to prompt me. That's honestly one of the reasons why I'm such a good worker, is because I've been systemically, as well as my upbringing and the work environment and how my parents have raised me, that when you work and you're not there just to sit around, which I definitely don't see a lot of people that I work with have that same mindset. But that has led me to do a lot of burnout because I thought, being autistic, I take that stuff literally. And I'm always trying to find projects or things to handle myself within an 8-hour workday, even though I handle things so fast and efficiently that I end up pushing myself faster than I should instead of taking my time. And I'm also at confusion or not sure really of whether I can live alone, because it's also a factor of my current financial as well as regional location. America isn't built on helping people. It is all built on being individualized, and it's not like nobody, especially where I live in California, is able to live alone. Like I will forever have to have somebody either living with my family, living with a partner like my husband, or living with in a community or something. I can never really live alone. So I can't really say that I attribute that to necessarily my autism or my circumstance. However, I do still feel that even though I have built up the skills to live somewhat independently, I would benefit and I would be more than happy to have some kind of caregiver or some kind of other support in my life that could help me with my daily tasks of like eating and taking care of myself. And this is why I think intersectionality really needs to be discussed more and more within any realms of community or mental health, and especially in terms of autism, is that this idea when it comes to services or caregivers is honestly a very Western white mindset that like it's a separate need, because in a lot of Asian cultures, you are expected to take care of your parents. You're expected to take care of your family, and you're going to be a part of that community and even living with your parents and family until you're like an adult in some cases. And it's the norm for us. So the idea that I would need another caregiver or somebody is somewhat foreign to me, because it is something that is already ingrained as the norm for Asian cultures, where your parents are your caregivers and that they're there for your support, as well as Asian communities in general always you tend to conglomerate together because it has a sense of community where we are helping each other. And this idea of really individualizing or having a sense of adulthood or lack of, and like not wanting to infantilize others is, I think, a very westernized white culture mentality, because Americans are very much set on the foundation and mindset that you need to be an individual, you need to stand out, you need to be unique, when that is really not the case for a lot of different cultures in a lot of different countries. A lot of different countries and cultures pride themselves on community and the care of others and caring for others. Americans don't have that mindset. And since I was born and raised as an American, I, in a sense, had to, like, wanted to push against my parents' like Asian culture of wanting them to care for me, wanting them to always kind of be there to support me because of the Americanized individualistic independency side of it. Though I absolutely love being and living on my own, it is hard, and I see now that the things that I was able to do when I was able to work like 3 part-time jobs and go to school full-time when I got my master's was only because I was still living with my parents. And the financial responsibility, the daily day stuff of like living and being able to eat and take care of myself, I didn't have to factor in to my routine or to my mindset because I had a caregiver there. My parents were my caregivers, whether I realized that or not. And now, since I am my own caregiver, I now realize why I have such a big skill regression, and it's harder for me to do certain things that I was able to do before, and I had the time to do before. And a lot of the reason why I'm looking into understanding my different support needs now is because I had already brought this up to my husband, and I was telling him, hey, I think I have moderate support needs, and right away he just went, yup. Like, there was no argument there of like that I was just lower support needs when it came to my autism. And it was definitely, another realization factor of somebody who has known me for over 8 years now, that I live with, and who is my partner. In a sense, we are both each other's caregivers in some ways. He could see the change and shift of things, of what I used to be able to handle versus what I can handle now. And this idea of caregivers, I mean, I know different countries who have more funded healthcare, like Canada, Sweden, basically any other country except for the America, has a little bit more ease with that aid. But this idea about like aid for a caregiver, I think is such a complicated part of the discussion for American autistic families and individuals specifically, because we literally don't have that type of resource. That's why it's even more important for us who are Americans like myself, and we are the main ones who are taking over the narrative of autism because of our ability to speak and because our culture is just so loud when it comes to anything that we're passionate about. Because we come from such an individualized mindset, we are forgetting every other person that's a part of our community, and how that individual mindset of wanting to talk about our own experiences really can overshadow other people's need for resources and services in this state and country.